Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another week of Follow the Leader. I am your host, Lee, and I am here with renowned Christian nationalist scholar, Dr. Andrew Whitehead. Welcome.
Hey, good to be with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Andrew Whitehead has his PhD and currently serves as the professor of sociology. And I'm going back and forth between tabs, but you have written over 50 articles, as well as two books. One I'm holding now, Taking America Back for God. And in his video in the background, you can see the other one, American Idolatry.
Yeah.
And he is a leading scholar on, sociologist scholar on Christian nationalism. Thank you for joining us. Tell us, Doctor, how did you get into this line of study? How did you get into this focus?
Yeah. Well, part of it is kind of the professional journey aspect of it. So, as a social scientist, being interested in understanding why Americans do what they do, why people do what they do. And so I was interested in religion and in the US especially. And then, yeah, as that kind of continued in grad school, trying to understand how religion influences the way people see their social worlds, how they act within it, but then also how society and our social worlds influence religion as a kind of a driver of societal change. And so part of that is using large national surveys just to understand when Americans hold particular views, how does that influence how they vote, what they think about the family, who should have civil rights, all of these things. And so over time, started to look at some questions that I thought kind of help tap into this idea of Christian nationalism. So how much people think Christianity should be privileged in the U.S. And in working with some other people, and Sam Perry is one of those, we started to see that if somebody agreed with these questions a lot, it really was powerful in how they understood a lot of other issues, things that you wouldn't think necessarily would be connected. It really was a driver of those views. And so we started to, yeah, study that more and more. And we found that, yeah, understanding Christian nationalism is key if we want to understand a polarized society and the role that Christianity or religion writ large plays in the US. And then part of it too was my personal journey. So I grew up in a conservative evangelical area of the country, northern Indiana. And so I was kind of steeped in this world growing up and in my own personal kind of journey and even faith journey. You know, this idea of the US as a Christian nation was kind of taken for granted, right? And where I grew up. It's kind of to be a good American is to be Christian, and to be Christian, you know, it's probably ideal if you're an American. And so kind of interrogating those as I got older and kind of moved out of those spaces. So both of those together, you know, kind of joining that. And I kind of described that in my second book, American Idolatry. That was really kind of what brought me to the study of this. I think my own personal experience kind of sensitized me to it. And then, yeah, as a social scientist, trying to use, you know, the skills that I gained and applying those to kind of back it up empirically. So it isn't just kind of what I thought, but what we really see in the American public.
And you say all of that, and it makes so much sense. And then there's also this element that it's like, what do you mean there's a group of Christians looking to take over our government? And you're like, well, actually, like, um, and it there's just so much more to it because, like you said, I mean, so many of us have grown up in Protestant Christian America. Um, a lot of us have grown up with possibly a flag in the sanctuary
Right.
somewhere that
Yeah.
we didn't think we didn't. So this idea of Christian nationalist almost comes off as like, well, what do you mean? I
Hmm.
love my country and Jesus. Why is that bad?
Yeah.
Tell me what is that difference? How do you make the jump from patriotism and someone who simply loves their faith to Christian nationalist?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question and really important one too, right? And I think it's super important in this time because we start to see those who would like to kind of take Christian nationalism, that ideology, and really push it to the forefront, reacting to some of our work and trying to redefine it. And so they'll say exactly that. Well, hey, Christian nationalism, all it means is that you love your country, you're patriotic, and you love Jesus. And they're like, so don't be afraid of it. It's not a big deal because that's all it means. So Josh Hawley has said that, Marjorie Taylor Greene has said that, and others. And so, yeah, it's really important to understand exactly what we are talking about. So, with Christian nationalism, and this is kind of the empirically supported definition, right? So, it isn't just made up, but as we survey the American public using lots of different surveys over a lot of years, Christian nationalism is the desire to privilege a very particular expression of Christianity in American civic life and to use the government at all its levels to defend that particular expression of Christianity as ideal, right? And so it helps define our national identity. It helps define who ideal citizens are, who should have access to civil rights and social benefits, or the easiest access. And so the key part of that definition is a particular expression of Christianity, because it really is not all expressions of Christianity, because anybody that is grown up Christian, or if even in the US, I mean, you can, go out into any kind of city or suburb, you're going to see a lot of different types of Christianity, buildings and all of those things. But this is a very particular type. And so it isn't just loving your country and loving Jesus. It isn't just being a Christian and even voting for values and drawing upon your faith to do that. That isn't Christian nationalism either. But really, it's a desire to elevate and privilege the cultural beliefs of a very particular type of Christianity in American civic life, and to deny other groups, non-Christians, other Christians even, full participation, or the ability to participate. And so the way that I like to talk about it too is with Christian nationalism and that particular expression of Christianity. It isn't just the historic expression as we understand Christianity, like Jesus is the Son of God and there's a Trinity and all these things, but there's this cultural baggage that comes with it. So when people are like, we want to make America more Christian, there's a lot going on in that Christian, right? That is unsaid but understood. And so we can unpack that as some of the stuff that you're examining too, and your work draws that out. But that's exactly what we're talking about with Christian nationalism. That particular expression of Christianity and the cultural baggage that comes with it, that's what makes this country what it is, what it should be, and we need to defend it.
And that's a great point, is that it's a particular expression, um, because we are seeing some confusing alliances, if you
Hmm.
will. Like, we are seeing some Catholic Christian nationalists,
Right.
pairing with Protestant evangelical, historically have not gotten along. So it's interesting that there is some overlap, while if they continue on their
Hmm.
journey, they're eventually gonna battle it out with one another, and
Hmm.
it's it's interesting that, people form or groups form alliances and allegiances, until not. But that's a good point, though. Can you talk about the theology, that you're
Hmm.
seeing in your surveys with Christian nationalists?
Yeah, and this is another important point too. Is when we survey the American public, a lot of times the different theological aspects that you might think are really strong or really pushing them actually fall kind of behind, like they're kind of hidden, or it's kind of messy. So, for instance, one thing we could talk about is the idea of the second coming or rapture, right? And so for those that maybe grew up Christian or have some knowledge of it, this idea of a post millennialism or a pre-millennialism, right? So is it something where God or Jesus is going to come back and take Christians with them and kind of rescue them from the world, kind of a premillennial idea, or postmillennial, that Christians need to be working to make the world as it should be, to then that when that happens, God will come back. And when we survey the American public, a lot of folks really are across the spectrum on that. Like there isn't any particular view that they hold, kind of tend to be more premillennialists, probably because the Left Behind series was so powerful and like everybody just kind of thinks that's the way it should be. But when we look at writers that were really influential early on, like Rushduni, he was postmillennial, right? And so the theology isn't as important. So when we're talking about Christian nationalism, the theology goes about as deep as we're Christian and whatever that might mean. And so Jesus, God, Trinity, Holy Spirit, kind of those basic things. But what's really important in the true drivers are those cultural aspects of Christianity that have been kind of intertwined, or what I like to call cultural baggage that comes along with it. So some of this is, this idea of a comfort with authoritarian social control, right? That the world is chaotic and we need strong rules and strong rulers to come in and enforce order. This idea that society should be structured according to a traditionalist social hierarchy where men lead, women support, marriages for men and women, they should have babies and preferably a lot of them. And anything that kind of takes us away from that should be pushed to the wayside. Um, and then to this idea of strong ethno-racial boundaries around national identity and who we are, that this country was created by white Protestant men for the benefit of white Protestant men and their families. And other groups or people maybe could live here, but this country isn't necessarily for them. And so that's a big cultural aspect. And then a sense of populism and
Mhm.
conspiratorial thinking,
Yeah.
that this country is for the common man and woman, and that elites and elite institutions are stealing it away. And so we need to beware of them, and we need to take back our power, and it's for us. And that leads to this kind of sense of victimization and being persecuted. And that opens people up to much more conspiratorial thinking that this is being taken away. And then more recently, too, some of the work we're doing is highlighting how um, this kind of neoliberal capitalist ideal is intimately intertwined in that as well. And we're still kind of exploring that, but social class is a big part of it too. So when we're thinking about the influence of Christian nationalism, it does kind of highlight these historic Christian beliefs, but really at a very surface level. What really matters is that cultural aspect that gets brought along with it, that people just understand. So when they say take America back for God, right? They have a very particular understanding of, okay, what does that mean? Right? It's white men, women, their families have the easiest access to all sorts of civil society and benefits, and anybody else outside of that, really, this country isn't for them.
And I'm glad you've made a lot of great points in that, because as I was reading a lot of our early government documents, as they were writing our Constitution, our First Amendment, First Amendment, the Establishment Clause, there are letters exchanged where people of faith were very much on board with, like, no, we don't want a Christian nation. We just came from England. We know what that's like.
Yeah.
Um, but interesting, I see a lot, and I see it. I recently have been researching Pete Hegseth and his book, and he talks a lot about Exodus. And there was Exodus mentioning at the American Revolution.
Mhm.
So there is this like Exodus component to it, this Old Testament. How does that play into the relationship with Christian nationalists and Israel?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big question too to think through, because what we find even in that first book and even since then with different studies is that for Americans who strongly embrace Christian nationalism, there is kind of this dichotomy between how they view the nation of Israel and then how they view Jewish people or even Jewish Americans, right? So if we ask them, if, and we show this in the book, if we ask them if they fear certain groups, and we talk about atheists or Muslims, um, people who strongly embrace Christian nationalism are more likely to say that, Jewish people, want to harm me, even physically, or that they hold values or morals that are different than mine. So they have this kind of negative view of Jewish people. But if you talk about the nation of Israel, they have this very high view of it, that we need to be on the side of this nation. And a lot of that has to do with their views towards the end times, that God is on the nation of Israel's side. And so America also needs to be on the nation of Israel's side if it wants to stay on God's good side. And so they kind of view Jewish people and the nation of Israel almost separately. So one pastor in Texas, He's the lead pastor of First Baptist. And, he would talk about how we need to defend Israel. We need to be on its side. It's so important. But then he would also say that Judaism isn't a true religion, right? People that follow that are not going to heaven. And so we see this dichotomy. But I think too, with your thoughts, it's just a part of kind of religion, especially Christianity in the US, just drawing on these narratives of the Christian Bible, the Old Testament as Christians understand it, to kind of, yeah, to create this narrative of what the United States is. And really those folks were doing that on some of the first ships coming over here already. They were really drawing on that and kind of highlighting how the power of religion, right? And drawing these strong social boundaries to show who we are and what we're all about.
Yeah. And that is a great point. The Puritans did not come to have a religiously free society.
They did
Like
not. Yeah.
I have a lecture series that I do around Montana libraries where I do Scottish witch hunts, and I look at how religion played a role in the Scottish witch hunts,
Yeah.
and so I'm like, they're all connected to the Salem witch trials, and so. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like you said, these were they had a vision, and it was defeated at the time of the Declaration and Constitution. They wanted a secular government. So when you research this Christian nationalism,
Hmm.
um, this phrase might be new, but the themes aren't. When can you point to where Christian nationalism was kind of coined and that word?
Yeah. So I think, um, in the more recent in the last 20 years or so, there were some journalists writing about Christian nationalism in the 20s, the 2000s, when George W. Bush was in office. Michelle Goldberg has a great book that came out, I think, in '04, '05, where she uses that term and she's kind of just exploring, among these groups. And so it isn't a term that, that we just made up out of thin air, but others have used it. And so in that sense, I think it is relatively recent, but these ideas and what Christian nationalism is something we can trace back and even before the dawn of the United States, right? As we go back to the colonial period, this idea of elevating and privileging a very particular expression of Christianity and the cultural beliefs that go with it has always been a part of our body politic. And over time, it responds to different eras and what is going on. So when we look at the founding period and even as they were creating the Constitution and trying to formalize exactly what we would be as a country, the folks who were the Christian nationalists of that era, they hated the Constitution. And they hated it because it didn't explicitly say anything about God or Jesus. Like they wanted it to go away. But then you fast forward 200 years and you have David Barton, a pseudo historian, political operative in Texas, who's like, no, 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 no. They all loved the Constitution. The Constitution is divinely inspired. So it's ironic, right, of how that would be. But those same ideals, right, the motivation that this is a particular country for a particular type of people, and those people are us, and these are the boundary lines. That's always been a part of it. And so, yeah, as you look through the Civil War era, as you look through the New Deal in the early 20th century, or the Red Scare in the middle of the 20th century, through the civil rights and gender revolution of the 60s, and then the 70s with the rise of moral majority, you see Christian nationalism in those spaces, responding to what's going on around it, but ultimately at every moment giving this strong idea of this is who we are, this is what we're all about, and these are the cultural beliefs and values that we think have to be elevated in order for the us, the we, to be, at the forefront of who this country is and what it's all about.
You bring up David Barton, and I want to pause on that for just a second because in my master's thesis on Christian nationalism and U.S. military chaplaincy, I talk about him because a lot of his quote alternative American history is really pushed at military academies. He is also, I need to go. He is in close relationship with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick of Texas, who is also sits on a board of. I need to look at this, but My point to my audience is David Barton is very influential on the
Hmm.
right, and his information is not it's just not accurate.
Hmm.
And he's truly created a narrative of Christian history in America that is loose at best. And so that's what Dr. Whitehead is talking about. And I
Hmm.
wanted to pause on that because you talk about in your book, you have really awesome, as the kids say, bars, one liners, right? um,
Funny.
Political idolatry dressed as religious orthodoxy. That's what
Hmm.
this is. Because, like you said, it's not a deep theology. We're not getting into it's not as deep as Catholicism or something that has a whole uh, indoctrination and formality. Um, so this political idolatry, how how is Donald Trump seen as this Christian hero?
Yeah.
Tell me about that narrative.
Yeah, definitely. I think in many ways, Donald Trump is the natural continuation, really endpoint of the kind of modern expression of Christian nationalism, is as we would see that really arose in the 70s in response to the civil rights movement, the gender and sexual revolutions of the 60s. So the rise of the moral majority, essentially. As we see that taking place, they really kind of set aside this idea of religion or Christianity is best practice individually or with your faith community, but now we need to be active and we need to do something about what we see taking place around us. So Jerry Falwell is a key leader in that moment, in that time. And he has a really interesting, obviously, history up until the present moment through his kids and Liberty University. But when Martin Luther King Jr. was preaching and teaching, leading the civil rights movement in the 60s, Falwell has a quote where he essentially is saying, hey, pastors and preachers should not be out there trying to make political change, right? We're about saving souls and that's it. But then about 10 years later in the 70s, he completely flips and he's saying, basically, we have three things we need to do: get people saved, get them baptized, and then get them registered to vote. Right. And so it becomes we need to have close contact with political movements and systems, and especially the Republican Party. And so it really became this idea of, faith really having to have a role in politics. And that's a key part of what it means to be Christian and creating that theology. And so with that comes this idea of um, what is it going to take to get the job done? Right. And who is going to do that? And so as Reagan came on the scene, they throw their weight behind him, and he obviously wins in 1980 against a lifelong Southern Baptist Christian of Jimmy Carter, who wasn't quote unquote Christian enough for this group, right? Because again, it isn't about actually embodying the values of Jesus or anything like that, but are you going to put at the forefront the political views and values that we think are so important? And that's what it is to be a true Christian leader. But then, through Reagan's presidency, they're actually kind of upset that he didn't get enough done. And then
Mhm.
first Bush, same. George W. Bush too, right? After a couple of years, they're like, what are we doing here? Like, this isn't, we're not getting enough done. So when Trump came along, I think he's actually the most perfect distillation of the endpoint of what this is all about, and that is
Mm.
political power. And it isn't
Yeah.
about whether the person executing that power personally believes the way that quote unquote we do, or embodies these values that we say are important. But do they give us access to the levers of power that we want to enact the political and social changes that we want, that we say this is all about what it means to be Christian. And so that cultural baggage aspect that I talked about a second ago of authoritarian social control, they have this view of God wants society to design in a particular way, but chaos is tearing it apart. And so we need a strong ruler to come in and enact that order. And they see that as Donald Trump. And so it really has nothing to do with who he is as a person. Obviously, he has no clue what, really even a surface level of Christianity is, but that's fine. That doesn't matter. So you have, different leaders in the movement saying, hey, we're not electing a pastor in chief, right? Or sometimes we want somebody to punch the bully in the mouth, as Tony Perkins said, Family Research Council. So they just want a person that will allow them to do what they want to do. And Donald Trump is that.
And I'm glad you make that distinction. He's not the pastor in president, because there is a difference between theocracy and theonomy, which is what some of these laws that you're talking about that they're looking to address. They're not looking to make Donald Trump the bishop, the head of the church. Um, but there are theonomical reasons that we should be concerned about this
Mm,
rise to power.
mhm.
Um, One thing that you talk about in your book is that this is white supremacist, but eliminating racism is not going to stop it. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, yeah. So a key cultural aspect of Christian nationalism we find over and over is this desire for strong racial boundaries around national identity and who we are as a country. And this has roots again back before the dawn of the U.S. The first Western European folks coming here were saying this is because God wants us here, but they had to make sense of the black bodies they were bringing with them as slaves and the brown bodies that are in the way occupying this land. And so, how do we take this country for God and country? Well, we need to have a political theology that allows us to push these people off the land or to kill them and to enslave these people that we brought with us. And so, in the earliest moments of this country, racism and these racial ideologies were closely intertwined with Christianity to where what we understood to be good meant Christian and white, and bad or heathen meant non-Christian or black or brown. And so this allowed them to essentially enact all sorts of atrocities. And so that's been a part of Christian nationalism in these lands since the beginning, and we still see that today. To the extent that, for example, when we survey the American public, and we ask a question, what do you think is a greater hindrance to national unity? Is it religious diversity or racial diversity? Right? So a bunch of religions trying to operate together, or even non-religion, or different racial groups. And what we find is that Americans that strongly embrace Christian nationalism, they're more likely to see racial diversity as a greater hindrance to national unity than religious diversity. So here again,
Really?
it isn't
Mm.
just about Christianity as religion, but the cultural baggage that comes along with this particular expression of Christianity, and that has racial undertones. And so it's a key part of it. And so it's something too that I explore more in American idolatry, but it's something that we find over and over as a really key aspect. You really can't understand race and religion in the US. Or even those separately without them together and understanding that history and what they do.
Thank you. That's such a distinct, a good distinction because I was raised progressive Christian um, and I saw it. I was down in Texas, but um, it's a different worldview. The evangelical conservative side of it, and so I'm learning, and a lot of my audience is learning. Like we weren't raised hearing those
Mhm,
sermons, that
mhm,
language.
mhm,
So it's really important that I'm reminding my audience that this like every Sunday, these messages are being reinforced.
mm.
And this sort of David Barton alternative history, that's not new. We had pastors during the Civil War talking about the curse of Ham. That's not, we
Right,
have
right.
lore making for, this religious, that's not new. That's not a new strategy. So
Yeah.
um, thanks for speaking on that. Because also, it's funny. I recently, so over the summer, I spent 2 months serving in Pakistan, and I was working with women over there, and obviously was very much exposed to all the different conversations of Islamic nationalism with Afghanistan and the Taliban being right there, and then I come back in the South, and there is such an emphasis on controlling the home, right? Male dom, and that's especially coming out of the Taliban. But you're also seeing this in your book, where Focus on the Family talks about if you control the home, you can control everything else. Talk about that, please, if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
No, totally. It really is a key aspect of it and a way of seeing our social world and how that kind of extends out. And we see it even more so in the last year. in 2 years. So I was just reading a news article today in the Washington Post about the Heritage Foundation, a new white paper they put out where they're basically putting forth all these policy ideas of trying to incentivize people getting married, staying married, and having lots of kids. Like this is key. And so still, it's really operative in this world and in this worldview, this idea of the home. And it really kind of echoes their larger view of God, obviously as the creator and leader of all reality and the universe and all those things. And then the family, the man is kind of the representative of that. And so it's this idea of order and submission and hierarchy, right? And so they want to see that too in society, that there needs to be order, and with order is hierarchy with certain roles and clear designation of who fulfills which role, and why. And yeah, it really is in response to a lot of the social changes that took place in the 1960s. So we talked about race, but also with gender for women, having access to whether they want to stay in a marriage or not, and being able to make that choice. And men too, but obviously they were able to for much, much longer. But women being able to do that, or entering the workforce, entering higher education, all of those things. And so, um, yeah, we see this push to really center this very particular view of the family as ideal, and trying to incentivize that and to limit opportunity elsewhere in order to essentially, by default, push women back into those roles and men into what they see as those roles. But what's really difficult is that we don't live in an economy, or global or national, that actually allows that, right? Like most families need two incomes. And so they have to navigate all of this around, like, there just aren't jobs where a man can go out and earn enough to support, stay-at-home moms, but that's what they want. And so there's this really big disconnect in what will actually take
Yes.
place. But that is a key part. Gender and sexuality is, yeah, a key cultural aspect of that desire for traditional social hierarchy. Who's at the top? Who's in the middle? Who's at the bottom? And how is that hierarchy, yeah, enshrined in American society?
Absolutely, and you talk about the role of women. I mean, currently they've or maybe she just wrapped it up, but Erica Kirk going on a press tour telling
Hmm.
women to stay home
Hmm.
while
Yeah.
out. To me, and I don't know what your Christian history knowledge is, but it was giving a very, like, Emperor Constantine, he sent his
Hmm.
mother, Helena, around the empire to hype up, Christian and it was like the playbooks just don't change.
Right.
Like,
No, it's
um
true.
and I mean, we're talking this is what empire does when it wants to marry it'll find a woman, and it'll find its press to her. So again, but it's you mentioned conspiratorial thinking because
Hmm.
when I first like kind of went down this rabbit hole, I felt like I was reading a bunch of people's I mean, you're reading other people's conspiracies. And creating and it must be how do you stay grounded? How do you and your team, as you're navigating these worldviews,
Hmm.
how do you keep your own ideology, or how have you changed and grown?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think especially in this current moment, with the work that we're all involved in, the people that are trying to learn more about this and see and understand what's happening around them. I think part of it is unplugging when we have to, right? And like there are times where I just need to listen to a podcast about movies that I love or whatever. Like I just have to unplug. But then I think too, another key part is when I'm in the work, recognizing and understanding that um there are certain things that I'm good at and that I'm here to do, right? So it is kind of the social science aspect and communicating that broadly, but I can't do everything for everyone or be a part of every push, right? But we have other folks like you that are helping to bring it to a broader audience through those skill sets. And there are, pastors and clergy that are in congregations doing that. We have secular folks that are engaged in the defense of, separation of church and state that, we can support and partner with. So knowing that, again, I'm not alone and that I can do what's in front of me and what I can do in the moment. And that is all that is really required of me. I don't have to do everything. I try to remind myself of that. And then finally too, just trying to find hope where I can in the sense that, struggle has been a part of the human experience. There's nothing about, I guess in this moment, living under leadership that, wants to harm lots of people. That is something we see, over over centuries and eons, really. And so, while that kind of is depressing from one angle, and another angle, we're here still, and we can still do what we can and protect who we can. And so I try to remind myself of that. That folks that never knew if they would see the kind of growth and blossoming of kind of their work to, like, till the ground and plant the seeds, they still did the work. And,
Mhm.
we've enjoyed some things that, folks from decades ago didn't get to because they just stayed in the work. So just trying to do that as well, and knowing that, yeah, hopefully we can care for each other and continue to push on together. That Yeah, that type of stuff can't be taken away, and so trying to remember that. I'll just say a caveat to all that, it is hard.
Yeah,
There's just a lot, it's just too much. It's too much
it
for
is.
humans to bear right now.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not a perfect answer, but those are some of the things
No.
that I think about.
No, and that's exactly it, is that we're not alone. We have to operate with that in that humility. Um, I myself have, like, weaved into conversations and I'm like, "Why am I speaking on this? I don't like, let someone else has the microphone on this."
Yeah, yeah.
I and, but yeah, and I think that so much of it is, and why I'm thankful to be doing this research so publicly, getting on calls with you and other folks, is so that other people feel less alone. Like, and I'm sure you do too. You get messages like, "Thank you for posting this. I feel less crazy," you know?
Mhm, mhm.
And I mean, even for those who have a lot of anxiety, I strongly encourage you to read Taking America Back for God. As you see, I have it all tabbed up. At the back is all, like,
It's awesome.
tables and stuff. No, that's the bibliography and notes. But my point being, really try to get yourself as educated on the subject as you can. I don't, on one hand, you will be more afraid because you'll see how serious they are, but also you'll feel a sense of control, I think is what I'm trying to say. So,
Yeah.
um, that is a great segue into sort of how can folks follow you?
Yeah.
Where can they read more, listen? Please share with us. How can we find you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that book, thank you, I appreciate that. And then American Idolatry is the second book, and that one is more interweaving my personal journey with a lot of the professional findings and trying to understand this. And it's really written to people who grew up within Christianity, right, of various stripes. I'm trying to, yeah, talk to and think through this from that lens. And so there's that. And then I have a Substack. Yeah, just my name, and then a Substack, you'd probably find it under American Idolatry as well. But that's where I write about once a month. I, post something where it's just, what research am I doing? What am I finding? How does it connect to something that's going on? And then on Blue Sky and in Instagram too. But I'm on those, and yeah, try to post a little bit of, yeah, what are we finding? What are we seeing, for folks that want to stay up with that? And yeah, that's where I'm at.
Well, absolutely. I love your work, and I know some folks, so I do some volunteering with the Special Olympics. So your work
Oh,
on disability and
oh,
Christian
wonderful.
nationalism, or
Yeah,
disability theology and Christian nationalism,
yeah,
um, I picked up on that too.
yeah.
So there's a lot we could cover. Hopefully, you can come back again.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Folks, we're just about out of time. But again, thank you to Dr. Andrew Whitehead, professor of sociology, Indiana University, for taking the time. I know you're back in school and and you're back at it, and the world
Yeah.
unfortunately is accelerating, and I'm sure you're getting a lot of calls. So thank you, and folks, we will see you next time here on Follow the Leader.